Hello, wider listeners. It is that time once again. It is that time of the week. And what time of the week is it? Well, it is that time of the week where me and a band of merry radicals come onto your radio waves and talk to you about what is really going on. We come hard, bring in that truth with a capital T. Talk about what corporate media isn't talking about. Talk about local issues and politics and activism. Bring you that hard-hitting analysis you will not hear on the corporate media. And generally call out the establishment on its BS. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. Now, before we get into the show, I've got to go grab my co-host, and I will preface this all by saying this show is interesting. It's really, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And we'll go into what I'm talking about in just a moment. We will be right back in just a sec. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So we're back, and so my co-host Lawrence is just coming in. And
What up?
Yeah, we got a lot of ground to cover today. Just to preface, a good number of issues going on here locally. Stories that we're probably going to get to later on in the hour. We've got a local public safety officer, works for the Kalamazoo Popo, who is suing the department for discrimination. Some very interesting stuff coming out of that. Also, a local immigration case we're going to talk a little bit more into. There was a story in M Live about a house over on Westnedge that was raided for basically making producing fake citizenship and residency documents.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And we're going to talk about the context of that. I was trying to find or track down somebody who was a little more intimate with the issue. So, I think we don't necessarily have context as to like who these people's main clientele was, but I'd like to talk a little bit about it later, at least in the details, and then maybe talk a little bit more about some of the abstract issues around it. Also, something that made national news. Engler was not kicked out of MSU despite his victim-blamey BS that he was spouting very recently.
Wait. Who was
John Engler, the interim president of Michigan State University. And also, our dear Governor Rick Snyder did pass that Medicaid work requirement that we were talking about on the show a couple weeks ago. But before we dive into all that, oh, and by the way, there's a lot of bad national news happening. We're going to do a whole section on what's going on in the Supreme Court, which is not so supreme right now. Oof.
Do we want to start with the bad stuff, or should we start talk about some of the good news that happened?
You know what? I think like this episode just, I think it may behoove us to talk a little bit about some of the wins that are going down because, particularly So I'm up this morning. I work third shift at my job. One of the first things the guys where I work do is they turn on the news, and lo and behold, like just watching like the was it the cast or the anchors on CBS this morning having to say the word socialist was pretty gratifying in itself.
I mean, okay, so for those who do not know, there were some progressive victories. There were some progressive losses that took place this past Tuesday election. People like Chelsea Manning, I don't think won her primary. Dylan Ratigan, who I am a big supporter of, he didn't win his primary. But there were some historic upsets and some amazing victories when it comes to the progressive left. Ben Jealous won his primary for the governor's race, so he's going to be going against the conservative. I don't know what the conservative's name is, but Ben Jealous, he was on Bernie Sanders' campaign. He's a mad progressive, and he won his primary, even though the establishment tried to bury his campaign with money so that he did not win. He still prevailed. And also, Miss Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, taking out Joe Crowley, the number four most powerful Democrat in the Congress, in the House, who was supposed to take over Nancy Pelosi's seat, gets the hands. Caught the hands.
And, it wasn't even a small, it was nearly... It was about a 25-30 point margin, too. And this is a guy who outraised her, he outspent her like 10 to, like, it was, low estimates was 10 to 1. I saw something that was saying 15 to 1. He raised over $3 million, and he spent over 300, almost 300, 3.5 mil. She raised only $30,000. And she only spent 190 of that 30,000 of that 300,000, and she won. And also, there was a state race, I think, in Maryland of a Democratic politician who voted not to get money out of politics, and there were some organizations that were not happy about that. And another incumbent lost their seat because they wanted to keep money in politics. I'll talk more about that story in a minute. But the other thing that was also revolutionary, Oklahoma legalized marijuana. Oklahoma, who's one of the reddest states in the country. Down the plains. There's going to be some different kinds of waving wheats in a little bit. But,
Oklahoma decided to legalize medical marijuana. Like, you want to talk about groundbreaking. Like, besides Miss Cortez, like, the progressive issues that we talk about on this program, that wave is coming. Like, there was some bumps earlier in the primary of certain people not getting beat. You still have Joe Manchin, who's basically now saying that he's gonna be all support. He's gonna be supporting Trump, and he's gonna be a MAGA now.
Well, I like there's this meme going around that's liberals quote, if we just elect Democrats, we can slow down this pace of fascism. And then there's a quote from Manchin talking about we need Black Hawk helicopters, and fences and drones on the border.
Like, that's the thing. Like, there was some the Justice Democrats, Justice Democrats, the brand new Congress, Our Revolution, they came out big yesterday, man. The progressive left, that wave is coming. It's real. And if the establishment Democrats do not come to the table and want to stand and rock with the people, they will get voted out. Because for those who don't know, Joe Crowley, he was supposed to take over Nancy Pelosi's seat.
Yeah,
He was supposed to be the next man supposed to be Speaker of the House when the Democrats take the House in 2020.
And I did want to dive a little deeper into that because I think like a lot of people, they're excited like, oh, somebody new, somebody young, somebody like real progressive got in, but this does have some far reaching implications. And I kind of started the show by joking about CBS this morning talking about it, but keep in mind, up until now, like any time the DSA would win an election, it would basically, you'd hear, the independent media would jump all over it. You wouldn't really hear a lot about like, did you hear anything about Lee Carter in the mainstream media?
Oh, no.
This is something like so big that they can't ignore. I think this is kind of part of and let's be clear about a few things too. Like her victory, she did have a lot of help that a lot of other candidates aren't going to get from national activists all over the country because people understood it's such a high-profile seat. It is a victory that could not be ignored.
Well, it was also them. It was people versus money. And also, you have to remember, she won in New York. For those who do not understand the New York primary, you have to register to be.
They have the most asinine primary system.
No.
One of
New
them.
York has massive amounts of voter suppression, and you are wondering, it's a Democratic state. How is that possible? Yeah. If you're not registered to vote 6 months before the actual election,
6 months,
then you cannot vote in their primary. Yeah. That's how, even though Bernie Sanders won the majority of the state, Hillary Clinton took New York.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Michiganders kind of have a hard time because we're an open primary state. Like I literally saw Republicans in the 2016 primary who would be like, "Can I vote for Bernie Sanders?" Okay, yeah, and then they would go and do that.
Yeah,
New York and many other states are a lot more restrictive.
They're closed primaries. Yeah. Like New York's a closed primary state, and also the way that they do a lot of their voter suppression, if you're not registered 6 months ahead of time, if you don't have certain paperwork, you cannot vote. Like they are not as democratic as they should be. And the fact that she was door knocking and running basically months beforehand, like months and months beforehand, and that they was doing a lot of door knocking, they was doing a lot of people power, and they didn't spend money on advertisement stuff. And also the fact that Joe Crowley didn't even show up to one of their debates. He sent a representative. This is how arrogant he was. He sent a representative to their first debate, saying, "I'm not going to debate you. One of my staff members will." And then when he got the internal polling that she might win, then he wanted to debate her. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing because we talk about Dem exit, or we talk about Dem enter. We talk about taking over that ghost ship, and multiple media, independent media has talked about it. But it's happening. It is happening. But we have to keep fighting. We're going to take losses because we're new, because a lot of people are new. But you have to keep fighting. And the thing that frustrates me the most, especially with the mainstream media, a lot of the mainstream media initially when she won did not even say her name. Like they would be like, Joe Crowley lost to incumbent, or Joe Crowley lost to new person. Like they wouldn't even acknowledge her. And she was represented by the Democratic Socialists, Justice Democrats, Our Revolution. She was represented by all the big name progressive people.
I'd say like the two headlines that I saw the most were like either framed it all around identity politics, like look, a millennial Latinx woman unseated Crowley, or in very like alarmed terms, like the Vox article, like Joe Crowley just lost to a socialist.
Yeah.
Yes.
No. Here's the thing, though. Like, and this is the thing that people doesn't understand about Joe Crowley. Joe Crowley he's not even though we're ragging on him, he's not a bad person. He just does bad policy, and he does bad.
He takes money from bad people too.
He is the quintessential establishment Democrat. And when we say establishment Democrat, this is what we mean. Joe Crowley was on the House floor when they were talking about this is a true story.
Yeah.
He was on the House floor when they were talking about putting more regulations on Wall Street. This is after Dodd-Frank. Joe Crowley left that conversation that was going on the House floor to go fundraise on Wall Street and take money from multinational corporations, and then came back and voted to deregulate Wall Street. That's the kind of person he is. He voted for the Iraq War. He even though he talks about his stance on guns, he takes money from gun manufacturer lobbyists. Like Joe Crowley, it's not that he's a bad dude. He does corporatist neoliberal things, and he needed to leave. He needed to go.
Yep. And like I'm looking at just somebody brought up a really good point that it wasn't even necessarily that Joe Crowley lost. They framed it. It's like here is who lost today. Corporations like the Blackstone Group, like
Honeywell,
like Comcast, like Microsoft, NASDAQ Incorporated is in there. They also took some money from Raytheon
and Honeywell and wait. I saw. Let me grab the tweet because there was a bunch.
Yeah, and
there was not a Fortune 500 company that he did not like.
Mm-hmm. And what's really amazing about this is like this is the DSA's and like our revolution's highest profile victory
and Justice Democrats.
Yes. This is proof positive that yes, you can get somebody with quote unquote radical leftist platform elected to as high of office as the House of Representatives, and that means there's actually going to be knock on wood, the general election's still a ways away, although she is in a heavily blue district.
Oh dog, she's dog. It's not. That's not. That is your next representative in that 14th district.
Mm-hmm.
That is what, because when you look at the policies that she ran on, she was fighting for a living wage. She's fighting for Medicare for all, a living wage, Medicare for all, universal free college and tuition, and the ending of ICE. Abolishing ICE.
Spent her last weekend before the election actually going down to Texas to check out some of these detention camps.
Right. All of those policies are 70 to 80% approval. They're over 60%. The overwhelming majority of Americans want those policies. So yeah, excuse me, I misrepresented. Most of those policies that I just said are over 60%. They're overwhelming majority of the country. So what does that mean? That means is that she's actually representing the people, and especially when it comes to how she ran her campaign. Over 70% of her money she got from small donations under $200. I think Joe Crowley's small money donations was like 0.9% or something like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It's very, very small. And, we
can move on to something else, but I don't want to hop on. But also, Oklahoma, saying congratulations. Thank you for coming to the party, and thank you for in the words of I forgot who said it. How many people are going to be locked up for non-violent drug offenses until we actually legalize marijuana? Who's going to be the last person? Yeah. Because the ending of this prohibition is coming close. Mm-hmm. But who's going to be that last person that's going to be locked up for marijuana? And that also brings me to another thing. This is the reason why we rag on President Obama so much. Mm-hmm. And some of my Democratic friends get mad at me, and I'm like, he smoked marijuana when he was younger. He was the president of the United States, going to an Ivy League school. He knew, and he was a constitutional law professor. He knew the effect of. He knows how the drug war affects African American community, and also just low income community, the low income Americans, and how it's disproportionately affecting our communities. Yet when he was in office and had power to change it, he did not. And this is what scares me. This is one of the things that scare me, is because what happened if President Trump tells Jeff Sessions yo, we're gonna move marijuana off the Schedule 1 drug, stop being a Schedule 1 drug. If the Republicans take that position and they say, yo, we're gonna, even though Jeff Sessions is probably never gonna do that, but I'm just saying, if Trump is trying to win next year, he could easily do that. And that would be a position that they could have that our last president could have done. Our last president knew it was wrong that nonviolent offenders was getting crazy sentences. That's why he pardoned so many people. So you put a Band-Aid on the problem instead of fixing the cause of the problem.
Yeah.
So it's like come on, man.
A lot of it's funny.
It's upsetting.
This has been coming up more often lately. Kind of pushback because what's been in the news a lot lately has been the Trump administration's abhorrent fascistic immigration policies. But you got to point out, like, this didn't just come out of nowhere, and. Like many topics we talk about, it's like, no, Obama wasn't as bad as Trump, but here's what he did. His administration basically left a table full of loaded guns, and they went out the door, and then some trigger-happy orange kid came along and was like, bang, 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 bang. Like the apparatus that the Trump administration is using through immigration, or that Jeff Sessions is using to pursue his anti-marijuana agenda, all of these are, they are the results of
inaction and cowardice when the American people want action on these policies.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. But there were some victories. We had some victories. And there's a lot of good things to celebrate, especially about yesterday's primary.
I did want to point out, let me bring up the article, because we're going to be going hard into the Supreme Court in a minute here. But they did actually do one good thing. Wait, where is it? Okay, well, the gist of it is it was actually, it was a good story about privacy rights.
Yep.
So it was a 5-4 ruling, and basically what it is, it's at least legally, and like CIA and all of our government agencies are pretty shady, so they might just do this stuff anyway. But at least, like, on paper, according to the law of the land, basically it's that the government will need a warrant in order to access cell phone site location information. This is automatically generated whenever a mobile phone connects to a cell tower and is stored by wireless carriers. The ruling does leave the door open to obtain information without a warrant in some instances. Still, the court recognized that cell phones are not voluntary but necessary for modern life, and that their technology poses some unique circumstances for the law.
The fact that we've talked about stories about how ICE and other police agencies are trying to use people's cell phones to track their locations without having a warrant.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about the overreach of different agencies basically destroying our Fourth Amendment rights and basically stepping on them. It's a refreshing thing that we have conservative judges realizing that, hey, these police officers are going to do this to us too. Maybe we should not let them have that power.
And I'll go on just kind of and this is Chief Roberts, who wrote in the majority opinion. In light of the deeply revealing nature of the technology, its depth, breadth, and comprehensive reach, and the inescapable automatic nature of its collection, the fact that such information is gathered by a third party does not make it any less deserving of Fourth Amendment protection. And this is particularly important because not even just talking about baseline privacy rights. This is something law enforcement agencies have done as a tactic. There's I'm forgetting the name of the actual gear that's used to do this, but law enforcement have been known to basically drive around with these cell phone capture devices to capture intimate cell phone data, particularly around in areas where there's a lot of protests or activists around, and use it to basically do kind of these COINTELPRO type information dragnets, where they suck up a lot of people's personal information from their cell phones. So the fact that the Supreme Court decision came down means, at the very least, if a police department gets caught doing this kind of stuff, there will be like some consequences to it. I'm not saying that it's going to stop them from doing it, because I mean, we talk a lot on the show about how, you know, our government does a lot of illegal but hey, at least it's on paper. Some Serpico type person could come along and be like, stop collecting people's cell phone data. And that was a terrible Al Pacino impression. I'm sorry. That was real bad. Man, I gotta work on that.
and a wild Nora has appeared.
Yeah.
This really matters. I've been. Hello. Am I?
There you go.
Yeah, you can hear me now. Okay.
Yeah.
This really matters. I've been talking about privacy rights for a while now, on the show and even in personal conversations. I know like quite a bit about how this stuff works, and this is I mean, you know, like we said, like our government agencies don't necessarily follow the law, especially the deep state and the police. But like, this is good news, and although it's mentioned it has the potential to open up for more privacy rights going down in like other court cases. However, you know, there's. Do we want to get into the other court stuff now, or?
Oh, you know, I think it would probably be a good idea to hop into a break. But do you got any other thoughts on this particular story before we?
I'm glad. I am glad that that the Supreme Court is realizing that, hey, you know, there is still a Mueller investigation going on. So if we don't put a stamp on privacy rights, maybe they are going to use this to, you know, take down our president. Hey, maybe if we're, you know, when we're going to our mistresses and wives, our that, you know, and we get our cell phones tracked, that's going to be a problem. So I'm glad that there's some level of sense that we can have, even though our privacy rights have been destroyed ever since the Patriot Act. But I'm glad that there's something. This is a positive thing. I don't want to completely just defecate on it. This is a positive story. The next story about the Supreme Court, though.
Stories.
Yeah, stories. Yeah, let's take that break.
Yeah, let's take that break. Catch our breath a little bit. There's going to be some heat when we come back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in their Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Are you trying to get your local business's name out to the WMU and Greater Kalamazoo communities? Why not do so while supporting Radio Evolution through underwriting and donations? For more information, please visit widerfm.org.
So we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So there is some breaking news. Some of y'all probably, well, we're in the age of the internet. A lot of y'all probably already heard about this, but Justice Kennedy is stepping down. And this is after a whole lot of rulings that are mad problematic. Now, Justice Kennedy, if you don't know his history, he's kind of like a moderate Republican. He's been like a swing vote on a lot of these cases, particularly in regards to civil liberties. And, you know, for his part, a lot of times he will interpret the law outside of viewing it through any kind of partisan lens. But keep in mind, this is also the same dude who thought, you know, Citizens United is A-OK. Voted for a lot of made a lot of disturbing votes when it came to like kind of economic and business related issues. And, you know, frankly, okay, so here's the take that I have on this, and a lot of people, rightfully so, you know, it brings up two things, people, like, you know, what happened with Merrick Garland and how he got stonewalled until the new administration got in. And also a lot of people pointing at, it's like, well, this is again related to the election. It's another like big, if Hillary was president, we wouldn't be here type of thing. And, you know, something that popped in my head is that, like, so Justice Kennedy, does anybody know like why he is stepping down? Is it for health reasons? Does it have something to do with his family? Like, I don't know if that's been part of this news story at all. But I would say, like, look, unless there is some like dire crisis that Justice Kennedy like needs to attend to, like, that man is fully aware of the stakes. He knows what he's doing by stepping down right now, and even waiting just a few months. You know, granted, it wouldn't be this analogous to the situation that was going on with Obama, but the Democrats, if there probably will be more of them elected in November, could, at least theoretically, do something similar to what the Republicans did. And you know, fact of the matter is, like, this to me, it's not about Republican versus Democrat or conservative versus liberal. Trump is completely unfit to be making these selections. And granted, you know, it's not like he put David Duke in last time, but at the same time, like, this guy, like,
of course, this is way to the right of Scalia. It's not going to be good. No.
Here's the thing. If President, you know, Cheeto Face wanted to nominate David Duke, I would not be surprised. I really wouldn't. And it's not like this justice is a bastion of integrity. He agreed with Scalia that minorities should go to lower track schools. This man has, when it comes to a policy, he agrees with Trump on an overwhelming majority of things. So
if he didn't, he wouldn't be stepping down.
No. Here's the thing, though. The thing that makes me angry and upset is that we're going to get more Scalia-esque people on the court, and this also is another reason why we need to punch the Democrats in the face, and because of the fact that when you had a chance to actually nominate someone who was actually progressive, and you chose to sit on your hands and keep your powder dry because you thought you were going to walk into the next election, no. When you have an opportunity to create good change, and when you have an opportunity to fight for justice, do so. Do not wait. Because when you wait, you get garbage like this.
Yeah, and like, again, you know, a lot of this it goes back to a lot of like kind of voter blaming, and like, you know, look, the actual reality of it is, yes, if X number of non-voters had actually voted, we'd be in a different situation right now. But here's the thing. what is it that conservatives and Republicans do? They always blame people with no money and no power. And that's something even a lot of kind of like, more centrist liberals will complain about. Yet you switch it back around on them and they'll say it is all these dumb, stupid, poor people who didn't vote. And that's why we're having this terrible SCOTUS decision. This is why it is important. Like,
elections matter, folks.
Elections matter.
Elections matter. But also, and not to cut you off, Nora, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That you can see, if you want to see how this man likes to vote, look at the travel ban that they upheld.
Yeah.
Look at how they gave cops even less accountability for murdering people. Look at how they sided with fake pregnancy crisis centers in California. Look at how they not too long ago approved indefinitely detaining immigrants. Like, look.
Hold on. Before you keep going, the argument that they gave on free speech. So people who are actually not doctors, who are posing as doctors, people who are not medical professionals, are obligated. They have a freedom to lie to you about abortions. But within the same token, the Supreme Court has also decided or certain federal courts have decided that doctors in red states have to give false information about pregnancies, about abortions, before they can actually have one. So on the one hand, shut up and tell these women who's about to make some of the most difficult choices in their life, shut up and tell them exactly what we want you to say, and you cannot stop these people from lying to other human beings
about healthcare.
Yeah.
About healthcare.
Yeah. What I want to say though is we can talk about how elections matter and stuff, but like I think a big thing to highlight here is how like non-democratic the whole structure of the Supreme Court is. And I'm not talking about like democratic as in the party. I'm talking about democratic as in like actual voting people into power that are supposed to represent you and go by the will of people. So let's recap how the Supreme Court works. We have these 9 like old people who like literally sit on these seats until they die. They're not elected. They're appointed by a president and confirmed by the Senate. As we've seen, like even in these like even in these most recent primary elections, it's almost impossible to get rid of an incumbent senator from a primary challenge. Like you just can't do it. Like I'm convinced at this point.
On some cases.
Sure, but like. And we didn't talk about how if the Democrats had a majority in the Senate, even after the next election, which is still super unlikely because like they have a lot more of their people that are up for re-election than the Republicans do.
That's true.
And even if they do get a majority, then Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, they're probably going to vote for the Trump's appointee again. So like there's our court. This is the highest court in the land, by the way. This is the highest court in the land that like the only institution in Washington that seems to get any policy passed lately, and can overwrite just about anything, any other law in the country. Like this, if you need an illustration of how much of a non-democracy you live in, just look no further than the Supreme Court.
I'll let you get onto your point, Lawrence. But something I wanted to point out is like, I think this speaks to something that like, a lot of conservatives and even liberals have this really rosy idea about, the founding fathers and their intentions about, direct democracy in America. Be very clear, like, there is. A lot of the founding fathers were actually staunchly anti-democratic. They considered like the will of the people mob rule. I mean, this is why they started the Electoral College in the first place. That's why you don't have to be like you had to be a white land-owning person in order to have any kind of vote or voice, which really isn't all that different from feudal England when you really get to the nuts and bolts of it. So they originally created this system so that one of the checks and balances, the Supreme Court, would have there would be no direct selection by the people. It would be these elected representatives who, again, back in the day, there's a very small pool of the population who would actually choose those people. And keep in mind, when it was originally written, it's only been the last century that we've had direct election of senators. So originally it was, again, these people who would be elected by a small landowning group who would go on and be selected to be the senators for their states. So,
but getting back to the Supreme Court, because we kind of derailed on that. This court, and what I would do if we're gonna play politics, because that's what the Supreme Court does, even though it's not supposed to, it does play politics.
It plays politics.
Yeah, 100%. If I was the Democrats, if I was a progressive president, like if there was a Bernie Sanders or a Elizabeth Warren type of president, the people who I will put on the Supreme Court next would have to be the complete opposite of Antwon Scalia. So they need someone like Dr. Cornel West. like they need a
Nina Turner has
they need to have a Nina Turner to be on the court, because if they was to have a angry progressive black woman to be on the court, like it would absolutely we would absolutely see the changes in this country that we want to see. Also, the only thing that's over the Supreme Court is a constitutional amendment. And the only way we can get that is if we have an Article 5 convention. And we should have an Article 5 convention. Even though there are groups like Common Cause and others who are progressive groups who don't want it, there are other groups like Wolfpack who are fighting for it. And we should... And this also goes back to how we keep people accountable. If you don't like what the Supreme Court is doing, you have to make sure that your voice is heard. You have to fight back, and we have to fight back. We can't just sit around and just say that's just what it is and just keep on going with our heads down and our heads in the sand. We have to fight back. I'm not saying showing up at people's houses and yelling at them like how that's recently been in the news, which we could talk about. But we have to have a response back. So whenever the Supreme Court or our representatives, people who's supposed to represent us, are not doing so.
Yeah, that's true. Like the thing is, as dark as everything is, and I mean, this is probably one of the saddest things about it. Like, we've been here before. Like, and one of the saddest things to see is, and I think we commented on this last show, this whole like, this is not who we are thing. It's like, no, this is exactly who we are. This is exactly who we've been. we thought we got over a habit, but no, that is still part of the American identity and the makeup. And it's just, it's more obvious than it's been in decades, but you don't even need to go back a century to see cases like, Dred Scott and things that were upholding like, or Supreme Court decisions that upheld Jim Crow laws and upheld the mistreatment of immigrants, and basically all the things that we are seeing right now. Nobody challenged the people did challenge the internment camps when they were happening, but nobody did it successfully. I'm talking about the Japanese internment camps in World War II, not the ones that currently exist
right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, wait.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Nora.
With this makes like, because all this stuff we've been getting from the court, like, it's been bad. Like, but the few victories that we have had have also come through the courts. If we I don't see things getting any better even with yesterday's results. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it's great that we got rid of Crowley, but like, if we can't get like people like real populist left candidates into the Senate, like, we're screwed. It's over. Like, how does I know that Chelsea Manning like was just coming out of being tortured into public life, but like only 5% to the other guy. Come on, like what? It's just really discouraging. And
well,
get your passports ready, folks.
Yeah, I know. Like I'm gonna touch on that later. It's been a dark couple weeks. This whole month has had a definite Handmaid's Tale vibe to it.
I actually do predict that Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned.
Yeah,
not too long from now.
That's a distinct possibility.
Here's the thing. That is something that is scary, because It's not just things like Roe v. Wade. If they want to think about, like, if you want to look at any of our amendments, the voting rights,
They already got that.
Like, no, I mean, they've weakened it. They haven't destroyed it. I'm just saying, like, if they absolutely and unequivocally just straight out just there's a difference between weakening something and destroying it. They've weakened it. They could destroy it. I straight up. Just straight up abolish it, and that's something that I fear all the time. It's the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, things like that are some of the pinnacles of our country when it comes to bringing our country to a more perfect union. And yeah, the way our Supreme Court is set up right now, you know, like some of those things are at risk. Some of those things may be at risk.
Yeah, and you know, like, I guess my only real answer to that is, you know, I mean, you gotta have some momentum when you talk about knocking out senators, and even at the height of you know, progressive and social policy, there were probably only a handful of politicians at that level who were present. Now, what you did have is you had socialist mayors, you had socialist state reps, you had socialist governors all over the country. Now, again, you know, what we've seen in history, like particularly like high-ranking, like senators and all that, they're hard to fall. They're hard. It is hard to get somebody who isn't some kind of connected centrist in there. But what we also see is that you create enough public pressure and you scare the ruling class enough, and you can start bending things towards another direction. I'd say that's probably our biggest problem right now. The ruling class is not afraid, and it'll probably take a lot more election victories, a lot more public pressure, a lot more
civil disobedience,
and uncivil disobedience, as a matter of fact, to really get that going, get that pushed in the other direction. And, you know, granted, I think there is an element too of just, we are on the defensive right now. The Trump administration, I mean, they ain't gonna listen to anything anybody has to say unless I mean, it's very weird. Like, you know, maybe some celebrity can come in and talk to Trump about getting a decent Supreme Court pick. But you know, I mean, that's where we're at. Like, you know, this administration is on the defense, but it is emboldening the kind of local politics that in the past have worked as a bulwark against the oligarchs and the conservative class. So, you know, I think we really are seeing the ascendancy of a renewed and emboldened progressive left. Unfortunately, it has to come at a time that is just, it's like Lewis Powell is just his wet. Lewis Powell and Barry Goldwater's wet dreams just all happened at once, and it's just this gross, like, okay, I don't want to make anybody lose their lunch on air, so I think I'll just stop the metaphor right there.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah. Please. Jesus Christ.
But
let's move to another topic.
Well, I'd say we got about 7 minutes left. I was curious, like, maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into some of these actual Supreme Court decisions. There's actually one that just landed today that I don't think we mentioned, but we've talked about a little bit on the show before. And
I do want to laugh about one of the Supreme Court's decisions on the travel ban. When the senators added Venezuela and North Korea to the list, then the right
make it seem less racist.
Yeah, to make it seem less racist, they were like, hey, okay, now we're going to do this Muslim ban that Trump wanted. And
don't forget, we hate Muslims, but we also hate commies. So
this is the other part. This is the other part that makes me angry, is because one, Trump does business in the countries that he's trying to abandon. No one's gonna talk about that. Okay. Two, you have you're adding North Korea and Venezuela to the list One undermines the peace thing that they were just doing with North Korea when President Trump made a mess and threatening another country, and then we were not on the brink of nuclear. Then we came back from maybe having a hot war when the man-child president decided to, pick up his toys and stop being mean to the other kids. And now you're basically saying, well, we're going to travel ban. We're going to put a travel ban on that same country now. And yeah, the president has a right to do so.
To be fair, the travel ban amendment was drafted long before we were starting. Trump decided to do all his diplomacy with North Korea, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Go ahead, Nora. Sorry.
It's interesting, these different cases and the effect that they have on what we know as free speech and expression, the First Amendment. So let me get this straight. According to the Supreme Court, money is speech, but you can't go to this country if you're a Muslim from a certain country. You can be lied to women about their health care. Mm-hmm. You can.
Doctors are obligated in some states to lie to women.
It's not a violation.
And also you can refuse cakes to people. Yeah, that's a thing.
Hold on. No, that's another thing that we could talk about. I wanted to talk about on the show just briefly. Mm-hmm. The whole cake thing. And then restaurants kicking out Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and how people are trying to equate the two. That is, the false. Okay, because I've seen this online, and I just want to speak on it briefly, and then we can move on. You cannot discriminate against things that people cannot control. Their skin color, their sexual preference, their sexual identity.
It's known as protected classes.
Their gender. You cannot, you cannot discriminate against that. You can discriminate against somebody because of their actions and what they're doing to other human beings. So, and I'm saying this, and I'm saying this in the sense that if I see someone and I see that, and I know that this person is doing horrible things to other human beings, then as a business owner, I can refuse service to them. Here's the thing, and this is because and just to be fair, because this will be a slippery slope argument. If this was a different administration, let's say this was President Obama's administration, and it was one of his officials that went to a restaurant and they were refused service, I would be okay with it too, because the reason why is because President Obama, by international law and their administration, are also war criminals as well. Same thing with the Bush administration. So if Cheney and them was going to a restaurant and the restaurant decided to not serve them,
and the funny thing
is because of their actions and what they have done to other human beings in comparison to things that they cannot change: their hair color, their skin, their gender.
Yeah, and I was talking to somebody. It's like I was trying to explain to somebody, like Sarah Huckabee Sanders and everybody else in Trump's administration. They are people in power. They are elected officials. I personally always support, like, if you disagree with someone in power, you should be able to protest them. You should be able to use your First Amendment rights to say, I do not agree with what you're doing. In this instance, there's a business owner who said, I do not want to serve you. And let's be clear too, it's all framed around civility. The guy actually asked pretty politely. It's like, I don't agree with your policies. Here's a refund. I would please leave my restaurant. He wasn't like, get out. It's like some people.
The other part about that I want to say is don't go to people's houses. Don't go to Mitch McConnell's house. If you don't like Mitch McConnell and you know where his office is, protest his office. If he's not at his office, protest where he's fundraising at, because his donors will be pissed. Protest there. You know what I'm saying? Make sure that his donors know that you're pissed, and do not support and cut the funding to their campaigns. If you don't like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, actually no. If Sarah Huckabee Sanders and any other Trump administration are out at Mexican restaurants you're at a Mexican restaurant and you think people ain't going, and you don't think people go yell at you. How about there are certain foods that you're not allowed to eat in public if you're hurting a certain particular group of people. You know, Mexican food for you in this administration, that's one of them. Don't go to Mexican restaurants.
Yeah.
Just don't do it. Don't do it. It's not safe environment for you.
I'm just waiting for one of them to get caught at a Middle Eastern restaurant.
Oh my God.
No shawarma today.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That's gonna be a world star. That's gonna be a shade room. That's gonna be a world star.
Yeah.
That's gonna be all over YouTube.
Yeah. Wants to get splattered with some hummus.
Oh my God.
Oh man. Okay, so you know what? It's about 6 o'clock. I did want to talk real quick about one last Supreme Court decision that we didn't take. This is also breaking. Happened today. They made the decision on Yanis, which those of you who don't know, basically it's overturning a decision from 1977. It permitted public sector unions to charge fair share fees that covered the costs of providing collective bargaining, contract administration, and non-members. Now, all public sector employees will be under right-to-work laws. And it's designed so that unions, they can no longer charge workers dues. It'll be opt-in rather than opt-out. So basically people can get all the benefits of the union without actually having to financially support it. And, one thing I'm reading that In These Times has a good take on it because it does show, well, this doesn't affect private unions. It doesn't, it's not a standard that's going to affect every single union in the country. It's still a huge blow. It is still a huge blow to union organizing in this country. And just to kind of tackle like a false narrative I heard as I was coming in, some people pointed out unions have been more corrupted over the years. Sometimes a lot of them are in the hands of establishment forces and stuff. And a couple things I'd say to that is we're starting to see unions radicalize in a very major way. It wasn't all that non-recently where there was actually a union conference where they talked about forming like a working people's party. Not to mention, we're talking public versus private sector unions. There's been, statistically
private
speaking,
sector unions exist?
Well, yeah. Some.
I'm being facetious, yeah.
About 10% union participation in this country. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, that number in other countries like Germany, France, covers closer to 70, 80%.
Wow.
So, maybe that's why they have all those like worker protection laws and they can go on mass strikes like they do. There's a big reason why America has some of the worst labor laws in the Western world. It didn't happen by magic, that's for sure. But, I did want to mention public sector unions typically, they don't really fall prey to the kind of corruption, at least not as often as we see in certain private sector unions. But as I said before, you're really starting to see a renewed radicalization of the labor movement here in America. But yeah, again, this is just like the latest decision. And again, this is one that Kennedy voted for, and his replacement certainly will too. So, big takeaways is, we've really been shoved into a really hard place. There's going to be some really bad stuff, really bad decisions coming along the pipe as far as the Supreme Court goes. But some of the stuff would have already been happening, and some of the worst stuff, well, we've got to galvanize. We've got to resist, and we got to get ourselves out there. Because buckle your seatbelts. Take a breath now, because it's going to be bumpy. All right. Is there anything else y'all wanted to cap off with before we go to break?
I think now's a pretty good time, actually.
All right. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
W W W W W I W R double double double
W
R W
I
R
Wider is proud to be supported by Pedal Bicycle. Pedal Bicycle has 2 locations on 611 West Michigan Ave and 185 Romans Road. More information can be found at pedalbicycle.com.
Is your RSO looking for new ways to get its name out to Western's campus and the greater Kalamazoo community? Why not use the wider airwaves? For more information on how we can work together to promote your organization and events, go to widrfm.org and click on the Airtime and Sponsorship page under the Support tab.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. So let's move on to some other topics. And you know what? I think we were talking a little bit before the break. So, there's another high-profile police killing going around out there. We've actually also got a local story about some police discrimination. So, we want to kind of maybe tie some of these issues together a little bit.
Let's talk about the police officer discrimination.
Okay. Yeah. So for those of you who are not aware of this has actually been on local news a bit. But it is former officer Amir Khillah, I believe is how you pronounce it. And he was basically, his claim is that he was unlawfully terminated from his job in March. And I'm going to go right down, read off some of the incidents that his lawsuit is alleging. Said in February 2018, said Holdwick reprimanded Khillah for pulling over a black motorist and not issuing a ticket, and that's Sergeant Robert Holdwick would be Khillah's superior. In 2013, the city released a study showing that black motorists were more than 2 times as likely to be stopped by Kalamazoo police officers than white drivers.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep. And Holdwick told Khillah that a study found that they were issuing more tickets to white people than black people. So he straight up lied to his subordinate about that. Other things, sometimes he'd wear a traditional Egyptian scarf around his head before or after work. Said in January, people were kind of throwing ethnic slurs his way. Holdwick called him a haji in the presence of others. Yeah, if y'all don't know, that's I don't even know. I probably shouldn't say that on air. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
anybody,
yeah.
My bad. But that is like a really that's like a really bad racist slur.
That's like calling me me a black African American the N-word.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, you didn't know.
Yeah.
But for some people, and this is the thing that which we're gonna tie into the next story. When you have officers like this who, you know, they don't want to give out tickets because they don't want to add to the for-profit policing that we do, and he makes a judgment call like, hey, I'm not gonna give you a ticket, just run along. I guarantee you that if the person that he was giving a ticket to was not a black person, this would not be a problem. This wouldn't be a problem in any way, shape, or form, because people have been pulled over multiple times before and they do not get tickets. Sometimes you need to let your officers make judgment calls. When they make judgment calls like this, they shouldn't be punished. They shouldn't even be commemorated. He was just doing his job and he made a judgment call that didn't hurt anybody. Mm-hmm. In comparison to an officer who makes a judgment call and ends up killing a 17-year-old black kid. Yeah. On the same day Tamir Rice's birthday, which is the other story that we're going to be talking about.
And I did want to mention just a little bit more context here too. You know, one of the things that mentions in the article is that the lawsuit basically says a lot of this trouble started after Chief Hadley resigned last November. For a little bit of background context with that, you know, it was under his leadership that they commissioned that study that showed that the Kalamazoo Public Safety Department was actually more racially biased than Ferguson. Now, I don't agree with everything Chief Hadley did. I think that, you know, there was a lot of stuff that he buffed up, and sometimes I think he was a little more concerned with PR than solutions, but he did have a sincere desire to reform the department, at least to not have that kind of racial bias. And actually, there's some reforms he proposed that he was kind of like what's the word? Not strong arm, but kind of held back from really putting into place. So it's very illuminating to me that he mentions that some of these changes started popping up when Hadley was no longer there in his role as chief. Now, that's not to say anything against the new chief. She, you know, for all we know, she might not really have a good handle on everything that goes on in her department. But it does go to show, you know, if the department is not, if they don't have a focused mission to tamp down on this kind of stuff, it will show right back up. I mean, one of the biggest problems with the Kalamazoo Public Safety after that study is, like, it's not like a bunch of cops got fired. They got sensitivity training. They paired up with partners of different ethnicities. There was nothing actually put in place to bring about institutional change to make sure that racist or racially biased officers were no longer on the force.
It's not that. We've seen, and we talked about on the show multiple times, that you'll get officers who were fired from other departments being hired in other departments without addressing the fact that they were fired because they were using excessive force, or they weren't doing good judgments, or maybe they were just had an itchy trigger finger. It's upsetting when you see good officers, and this is what happens a lot. When you have officers who do good things like this, or there was another story that we talked about where an officer didn't shoot somebody and they were fired for it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, it's upsetting. This is how good cops, good people who are officers get weeded out, and you have criminals and thugs who stay there and then commits acts of murder and get away with it. It's really upsetting, and I hope his lawsuit goes through.
Yeah, I mean, everything we see here, it you know, granted, you know, it's like we weren't there, we can't necessarily codify it, but there's enough there to show that, like, you know, he was definitely in a not particularly friendly working environment when he was there at the department, and particularly in a city like Kalamazoo, which is as diverse as it is. Now, granted, we here on the show generally have a stance that, like, we need to completely and fundamentally restructure how policing is done in this country, but to the extent that you can get at least some harm reduction in there, having people in the police force who are sensitive to issues pertinent to certain groups in the community can somewhat help. Now, granted, you look at the broad statistics, and that doesn't really put a dent in the number of police killings, but it can at least make it so you have personnel in the department who could be responsive to certain issues. Muscling him out makes the department more what's the word, monochrome,
white,
homogenous. Homogenous is the word I'm talking about.
It makes it easier for behavior that will not be checked, or behavior that's bad for the community will not be checked, or you will not have a voice for certain people in our community. This is a man who you said was wearing Indian head wrap hair
Egyptian
stuff before and after work. So you don't have representation or someone who can speak to a portion of our community. You know what I'm saying? And you need people who you can talk to on the community in these groups, so they can they understand how to speak to certain people from their community when there's an issue, and because of that, you weaken the department.
Yeah, I hear that. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the recent police killing too, and it's while Kalamazoo, I think what we see reflected here is a microcosm of the kind of institutional police behavior that allows these things to happen. Because I think, as we were talking about earlier, the irony, this young man who just got shot, this was a rookie cop. It was literally his first day. Am I right?
Literally.
Okay, hold on. Okay, before that, Anthony, I forgot his last name. I forget the young man's name.
Antwon Rose?
Yeah. Young Rose, the dude the 17-year-old was an honor student. Mm-hmm. He was liked by his community. Most of the time when you have stories like this, the media likes to defame they like to blame the victim for being a victim.
Thugify.
They like to they like to criminalize the victim for being a victim when this kid wasn't. And this is the thing that the Supreme Court actually did that I thought was actually okay, is that they said that black people running away from cops does not mean that that you're not allowed to shoot black people who run away from the cops, because they have a justified fear of being shot.
They did, however, rule last week that it's just basically making it harder to prove that they violated your constitutional rights, including getting shot.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is the other thing. I'm glad you corrected that. This is the other thing about this story, that it's the same old story that we heard before. The person who killed Tamir Rice, which is actually the reason why I brought it up. This young man died on Tamir Rice's birthday. Tamir Rice was shot by an officer who was just sworn in, who was just fired for using excessive force. And Tamir Rice was shot and killed within 2 seconds. This kid ran away, and he was shot in the back 3 times. So I mean, it's another day in America. It's upsetting. It's angry. It infuriates me. But the reason why it infuriates me is because the same attributes that NFL owners like, that sports people, that NFL and basketball owners like, that the person's tall, they're strong, they're aggressive, they look dominant. All these features, these are the same features and things that are justified when we are being shot by police. Same things. Yeah. And it's the same type of things that they would use to demonize this kid.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with that, I'd like to pivot to a related topic. We're talking about some issues that happen in the community. This one wasn't as prominent on our local news as the other story, but it is something that I wanted to touch on. And, I was trying really hard to find a little bit more context on this. But it's a story that dropped on the 18th about a home on Westnedge that was raided by ICE for basically making fake documents. And I'll read a little bit from the article, and then I wanted to talk a lot about it in greater depth. But Thursday on South Westnedge Avenue, ICE made an arrest. And according to the indictment, there were 3 people. And they would charge a fee to undocumented residents, mostly from New York and the East Coast, and then give them counterfeit Puerto Rican birth certificates, driver's licenses, and social security numbers. Federal agency said the woman was involved with the document-making part and then referred to the clients to the 2 men. They would transport the clients to Michigan and harbor them here until at some point they went to the Michigan Secretary of State office and assisted the individuals in obtaining a driver's license based on fake identification. It cites 2 instances, October 2016 and January 2017, where clients each paid $2,000 each for helping them get Michigan driver's licenses. Now, when this initially dropped, like this, I think there's a couple ways you can view this. There's like a social justice lens, but if you really read between the lines here, so they were charging them like what? They said $2,000 for these IDs. Now, to me, what that sounds like some exploitation. Now,
that is exploitation.
Yes, that's some exploitation.
That's exactly what that is.
This isn't like, because I out the gate, some people were like, is this like an Anne Frank in the attic type of thing? And it's like, nah, this is, this really is more in line with a longer history of how immigrants are exploited. And this actually reminds me a lot of what a lot of Syrian refugees have had to deal with over the years, where they basically start out, they're middle class, there's a disaster in their homeland, they have to take what they have and basically end up spending all of their money either getting like fake identification or passports for it in order for them to progress to the next area. And that's something that a lot of immigrants who are trying to get in the States also have to deal with. And particularly, thinking about like, like who is their customer base, and because there's 2 kinds of customers you could get. Somebody who is like scrounging and saving for their money. Somebody, and it's my opinion, like if you are a productive person in your community and you're not like committing crimes, there should be an easy path to citizenship for you. Now, of course, there isn't. So, yeah, maybe your option is save up $2,000, which is pretty hard to do on a migrant worker's salary, and get these fake documents. Or, see you, Lawrence.
Yeah, my bad, guys. I gotta go. Sorry.
Yep. Or, and not to sound too Fox Newsy, but, there are certain criminals who could probably take advantage of this. But granted, I don't want to dive too much into the weeds of that because, again, we don't know the specific context of who these people were making the documents for, why they were doing it, but it definitely does seem like they were doing it for a profit motive.
That's as far as I can tell. I mean, I don't really want to comment too much without context either, but like, yeah, it's not going to be easy saving up $2,000 if you're making that kind of trek all the way from, wherever to this country, really.
Yeah. But yeah, if you want to read more about it, that was it's on MLive. It was published the 22nd. The headline is Federal Raid at Kalamazoo's Home Tied to Fake Document Scheme. And honestly, like, I think if you were doing this for the right reasons, not to, this is not a call to action by any means, but I could definitely understand like the moral position behind that. We are in some pretty dark times. People, granted, I know you sent along that video, and I did want to talk a little bit more about that. I've been getting a lot of heat for comparing Trump to Obama's immigration policies, and maybe we could take some time to be a little bit more specific about that. But Yeah, it is hard if you are trying to get into the United States from a country where you are dealing with repression or violence or murder, and particularly if you don't want to end up seeing your family separated. So, there would be a moral and positive way to go about this. If this was an activity one wanted to engage in. From what I've read, and granted we don't know a whole lot about the context of the situation, but it doesn't sound like it really was. $2,000 is pretty steep. So, okay, well, it's about 6:25, Nora. I'd say, do we want to go to a break, or do we, we could spend a few minutes talking about immigration a little bit in greater depth.
I think I'd like to talk a bit more about immigration.
Yeah. So go ahead.
You go first.
Well, I was actually just going to bring up, go ahead and cut me off if this is what you were going to speak towards. But, particularly from that video you sent, one of the starkest things that stands out to me and is basically ripped right from the ICE field manual, circa 2005, talking about separating families. And I don't know, did you want to speak to that more specifically?
Yeah, because there's been a lot of talk about what we should get angry about over this, the recent decision to separate families versus the fact that they're getting detained in the first place. But revealing that the separating family thing has been going on for this long is first of all a little bit surprising, but not terribly. Nothing about this country surprises me anymore. But it really illustrates just how bad our immigration problem has been, and how bad ICE has been in the first place. The fact that we created this organization that views people coming in with not the right papers are a national security threat, and of course is going to lead to people getting separated and people getting detained in these really horrible detainments.
And just to put a fine point on it, we were talking about having that policy being there as far back as 2005. It literally says in the ICE field manual to separate families as a deterrent for other immigrants who want to come up and go into the United States. Now, we could talk about how Trump has been doing this, full blast, but that policy has been there. And honestly, if you think Obama, his administration, never utilized or participated in that policy, I've got some bad news for you.
I also want to bring up that before she ran for president, Hillary Clinton also had the policy of separating children, sending the children back. That's what she said, on a recorded interview. You can look it up. And she, as a senator, she voted to create ICE. Interestingly enough, Pelosi voted against that. That's at least worth mentioning. Feinstein was also in favor of creating ICE, which is not going to look great for her later this year.
Yeah. I did want to mention a fine point. Most of our viewers are probably kind of on the far left, and you get in these conversations with people, and let me explain why we talk about past administrations like this, because a lot of people just think me and Nora don't just walk around just ha, guess what, that guy you did bad things too, and then we poop in your cereal. No. The problem is you have all these Democratic politicians now who are rightfully aghast at what the Trump administration is doing. But a lot of them are the very same people who had a hand in creating these very apparatuses that the Trump administration is using. And they might not have done them as full force. They might have not have done it as out in the open and in public. But these were things that were happening before Trump showed up. And the problem is, we bring these things up so that you understand in the future, they might be shouting about immigration now, but come election time, some of these very same people will talk about having a strong border and how ICE protects us from criminals and unsavory elements. What we're saying now is you got to use that outrage you have now and keep it focused and stay on the butt of these politicians. You got to let them know, it's your platform, you got to be about abolishing ICE. You got to be about getting a humane immigration policy in this country, because if we just stop and go back to the status quo of where we were at before Trump, it's it's going to be softer fascism, really. Like, you know, and that to some of you that might seem hyperbolic, but it really isn't. It is not.
It's not just ICE even. It's also Customs and Border Protection. Like, they're the ones who do a lot of the detaining outside of, like, you know, Core Civic and Geo Group nowadays. You know, taxpayers are paid $1.5 billion last 4 years for companies that run immigration detention centers. In these centers, I don't know if this is new or if this is just recent. I really don't know based on these reports. But children have been getting like forcefully drugged if they like annoy the people that work there. And there's horrid like healthcare conditions. Like nurses will like turn people away because of like benign reasons. Like they'll like avoid sick detainees because they don't want to catch something. Like if you're a nurse, you would have the tools to prevent you from getting it, and you should be working on that. Like I work in a healthcare environment that actually does provide stuff to migrant farm workers during the season, which is now, and that would have been unthinkable. Like we'd probably be sued or lose our grant money so fast.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the like interesting like mini good news things. Apparently, the Mexican government's offering to fly back some of these missing children to their families for free. The problem is they gotta find them first because they're all over the place. Michigan's one of the places. Michigan's a baby jail state.
Oh, by the way, Bethany Christian Services. So I find out that their role in all this. So initially, a lot of people, it's like, oh well, they're taking care of these kids, right? And they're they said they're going to reunite some of them with their families, but this is also, they get a lot of their funding from the DeVos family, and they get a lot of money from basically shipping these children off to foster care. So keep a very close eye on Bethany Christian Services, and basically see where are they sending these kids. Are they sending them to American foster families or back to their own families? Because there's already been reports that some of them have already been basically put into the foster care system. And particularly with groups like Bethany Christian Services, they usually end up going to families that are very, you know, right wing. They have a very particular reason they're adopting children. It's to bring them up with a certain, you know, white American Christian ideology, you know. So
they might have a hard time getting them to adopt those kids, though.
Oh, I mean, that's not unprecedented, though. Like
oh no,
this is a common practice for years. A lot of these children end up getting put into foster homes with people who, I mean, you can trace a historical line to, you know, what they did to a lot of Native children, you know, back in the day, where they'd send them off to these schools or they send them off to these families that basically force their indigenous culture out of them. But I think with that, why don't we take a break? There's a couple of things I think we wanted to hit up. I know, you know, I think maybe we'll skip the Engler topic. That's been getting a lot of news. I think a lot of people are aware of it. I did want to talk about the governor passing that Medicaid work requirement. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Venezuela, so maybe do that near the end of the show. But let's go ahead and go to a break. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
WIDR would like to remind you to please drive safely. Drunk driving not only puts your life in danger, but the lives of others as well. If you find yourself stranded somewhere, consider calling Drive Safe Kalamazoo, phoning a friend, or having an Uber pick you up. Thank you for listening.
and could be filled with an underwriting announcement for your local Kalamazoo business. For more information, please visit widerfm.org and head to the contact page.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. So, let's talk a little bit about some state news. Everybody's favorite, one tough nerd. Also tough, I guess, also meaning heartless. Rick Snyder, he passed that unfortunate Medicaid legislation. And for those of you who may not be aware of this, this is something that's been barnstorming through particularly a lot of conservative state legislatures and governorships. This idea that in order to get Medicaid, there is going to be an 80-hour Medicaid work requirement. This is something
80 hours a month, I should say, because that's a crazy amount to work a week.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, 80 hours per month. My bad. I misspoke. Yeah, that would be like some Upton Sinclair the Jungle type stuff. Yeah, this is something the Trump administration's been pushing, but it's not something they can actually institute nationally. So they've basically been having their, where there are states that are controlled by Republicans, they've been pushing this. Basically, the actual bones of it, he signed these new work requirements into law. Basically, excuse me. He did say the proposal will ensure continued operations of his Healthy Michigan Plan, which is available to residents and households earning between 100% and 133% of the federal poverty level. Basically, what this is actually going to do in Michigan, new work rules would apply to roughly 540,000 able-bodied adults, according to the nonpartisan House Fiscal Agency. And they project about 5 to 10% of recipients will drop out or leave the program as a result. And basically, where we're at right now, Michigan will need federal approval to implement the new work requirements.
Which he'll get.
He will certainly get. Excuse me. Man, you know, what it's actually going to look like, it's going to require anybody who is a beneficiary of the Healthy Michigan Plan to work 80 hours per month, and that's either a paid job, a job training program, a volunteer position, internship, or undergo substance abuse treatment. Hey, do you know where's the racism watchdog? Bark, 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 bark.
What about for
bark.
students? Like,
Yeah.
is that considered work?
Oh, well, no, according to this, it isn't.
Wow. I mean,
yeah.
I guess. Well, golly gee, I'm so surprised to see that the Michigan Republicans in power don't like people getting educated, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of like the well, think of the story we were talking about last week where they want to take out all the civil rights stuff from our schools. Like, it's basically just like, well, here's the deal. You can either learn the truth about the way things are or lose your health care. How about that? We don't want you learning stuff. You can go deal with your cold or your chronic medical condition. God. And, you know, even,
Well, the only thing else I really have to say about this is I think we're lucky that we didn't get the the more racist county exemption thingy that they're trying to amend to it. But it's still overall a really bad thing that this has passed.
Oh, yeah.
And I know people who would have died if it weren't for Medicaid. If it weren't for Medicaid, I might have died for different reasons. I mean, I'm well off, but I wouldn't have gotten my hormones when I needed them.
Yeah. It's very dangerous to me when you try to, like, this isn't about, like, getting this isn't even about getting, like, food stamps or something. This is about getting health care. We need to frame health care as a human right. Healthcare is a human right. And I mean, we should frame food as a human right too. But I mean,
and housing.
But this idea, it goes back to this whole idea that, like, if you want something in America, you shouldn't expect a handout. You shouldn't expect to get it for free. And it's like, we've seen, like, how do you lift people out of poverty? You help them with some of the preconditions that they need in order to do it. And that means giving them health care. It's like, if you provide homeless people with housing, it helps them dramatically change their lives, puts them on a different trajectory to be productive, or at least be safe. I mean, that's probably the most despicable part of this to me, is this idea that you should treat healthcare as an entitlement to be earned. It's cold. It's just ruthless, like just almost sociopathic market logic to me.
Well, I mean, it's what we have already, like, in a lot of ways. Like, you have to earn your healthcare one way or another, like, in the system that we live in.
Yeah, that is true.
Like, one of my friends, like, their employer didn't, like, send out the paperwork that, they became employed recently, and so it, like, kicked them off of their healthcare for a minute, and now they have to, like, apply for it all over again, which is all this bureaucracy, which we just shouldn't have to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely right. I guess with that story, why don't we move on to something more international in scope? And this is actually something that's been kind of picking at my craw a little bit. So I think, we got a lot of friends who watch Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and I do want to say, like, for the most part, I think he does a lot of good stories, but sometimes the analysis is not on point, and sometimes it's based on a lot of misinformation and kind of I don't want to go all out and out call what John Oliver and his team do, like, propagandistic, but sometimes they have a very wrong take on an issue, and it's unfortunate because a lot of times, like, they do some really good, I would call it investigative journalism, because nowadays it seems to be all the comedians are the ones actually doing journalism these days, but
yeah, you could. I mostly agree with you. Like, the comedians definitely have a better take on things than most of the mainstream media, but still sometimes they'll frame things in, like, a really not constructive way, or, like, kind of distract from other issues. Like, I mean, I'll watch Trevor Noah, like, because he makes me laugh. I like that dude, but that, I think Venezuela is a good example of John Oliver just getting stuff wrong. But here we're about to play a clip from Abby Martin from Telesur and the Empire Files. Yep. She has been an on-the-ground reporter about this in Venezuela for a while. She did a lot of work in Israel-Palestine as well.
Yeah, and one of the great things about this that I'd like to say is, granted, Venezuela is a very nuanced issue, and, I would call attention to the fact that, like, I really don't think any socialist or socialist-seeking economy should base themselves on oil, because beyond even, like, the fact that we should keep oil in the ground, it also is, like, that is, like, the number one resource that capitalists want to control. It's like being a mouse and basically trying to protect yourself by having great catnip exports.
Something else I want to point out about Venezuela, even though, like, their government is socialist in name, they have a larger private sector and smaller public sector percentage than France.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think Abby will talk a little bit about this, but a lot of the misconceptions about Venezuela's economy, they're being like the actual food distribution programs that they have, they're being undercut very much by like the private capitalist black market that is running under their, basically exploiting people and their need for certain products. Although at least in a lot of the big cities, as Abby's about to talk about, it's not quite as dire as a lot of people in the mainstream media are framing it. And this is from somebody who actually went there and talked to people on the ground. Not, a lot of these mainstream sources, they're basically reading off of a script and taking footage that they get on the ground from people they hire to get a certain story. So let's go ahead and play a little bit from this. This is her appearing on the Jimmy Dore Show, which is another journalistic comedian, by the way. So.
Failure of these populist policies that were enacted by Chavez and further put in place by Maduro, that's completely erroneous and fallacious on its face. We can look at places like Cuba, for example, who've had a socialist policy, right, that have actually been able to export doctors around the world and has some of the lowest rates of infant mortality, etc. You look at the actual facts on the ground, there's several layers here. The poor people of Venezuela support the government. The elections are actually free and fair, despite the dictatorship mantra that we hear from the corporate media all the time and the political establishment. You have to ask yourself why, when the Trump administration, Obama administration, and the entire neoliberal corporate media actually is behind a policy of regime change, you have to start to ask questions. Why is that? You said it yourself, Venezuela is sitting on top of the largest oil reserves in the world. They've basically been crippled with the same problem that all of Latin and South America has been, ravaged by centuries of colonialism, not able to stand on its own 2 feet, relying too much on an import-export economy, where they basically relied too much and heavily subsidized their economy on oil exports. And so when oil plummeted, they've been trying to figure out how to get their economy back on its 2 feet. The problem is that the U.S. has enacted a policy of regime change since Hugo Chavez got elected in 1999. Not only did the Bush administration work with the Venezuelan opposition in order to install a bloody coup in 2003, where they kidnapped Hugo Chavez at the barrel of a gun. And actually, you saw the opposition's hand at play when that happened. They immediately installed a new constitution, and it came along with privatizing the oil at the time. So that's what we saw back in 2003. And since then, the U.S. has given $50 million to the Venezuelan opposition. Trump administration, Obama administration meets with the Venezuelan opposition members repeatedly. I like to look at Chile, Salvador Allende, back in 1973 when we installed a bloody coup. Obviously, Pinochet ruled a horrifying dictatorial rule where, thousands and thousands of people were killed. The CIA had a policy of regime change there too. Like John Perkins says, before you send in the jackals and overthrow these leaders, you try to completely destroy their economy, right? And we had a policy that said, make their economy scream. That was the CIA policy in Chile back in the 70s. They're doing the exact same thing to Venezuela. And look, it's very complicated. My partner, Mike Preisner, just did a complete evisceration of John Oliver, talking about just all the tired tropes about Venezuela. The economy, it's a two-sided narrative. It's either the failure of the socialist policies, they've tanked the economy, or you talk to actual Venezuelans on the ground who are in actually the barrios, the poorer areas, because this is a class warfare on its head. You talk to those poorer people and they say, look, the media is actually distorting everything. Big capitalists are actually hoarding goods. You see, it's not just socialists, there's private corporations there too. They have hoarded a lot of goods. The inflation is skyrocketing because of this hoarding, because there's an economic war being perpetrated by huge capitalists in the country. One of the CEOs controls a company called Polar. He's a Trump-esque guy who's very vehemently anti-Maduro, works openly with these opposition members with an open policy of regime change. So when I was there, I went to supermarkets. I went around to about 8 different neighborhoods, poor, middle class, wealthier, and saw with my own eyes, there is no general shortage of food. There is a shortage of particular food items. Oil, flour, very basic necessities, like that girl was saying. We don't have basic things like toothpaste, toilet paper. Why are just specific things missing, yet you can find fruit, meat, like all of these other things that you can find at a supermarket. In fact, I found paper towels and napkins, yet no toilet paper. And it becomes a little bit more clear that there's specific items being withheld, being hoarded
by the capitalists
or being shipped out to Colombia, like they said, currency smuggling. There's a huge black market crisis there where you can take in a dollar bill and you get $20 off a dollar.
So let me get back to that. Polar?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Polar.
So that was a bit of Abby Martin being interviewed by Jimmy Dore. Just to kind of give you a little bit of insight and a counter narrative about what's going on in Venezuela. And I would also add, I got to say, if I were a black market capitalist, I would probably hoard the toilet paper too. That's some peak capitalism right there. Oh yeah,
ain't that some S?
You want to wipe your butt? $25. Nice. All right. So we got about 10 minutes left, and we just want to do some quick takes on a few other topics. I know Nora had a few things, and I kind of want to leave something a little bit more personal for myself near the end of it, but I'll go ahead and toss it over to Nora, who wanted to cap off some thoughts about the primary and a few other things.
Yeah. So one thing that we missed talking about in the primary earlier, so I don't know if you remember when Steny Hoyer got caught on a hot mic saying basically that there's been a decision made in the primary was going to be rigged in Colorado's 6th congressional district. Well, the decision was indeed made, and they got what they wanted, which I guess is one of the other defeats. I would have expected that to kind of crush that for the establishment, but I mean, I guess I was wrong. Maybe they just decided to put more money behind it and call it a day. But when it comes to the general, they're going to play that audio clip over and over, and they're going to crush the guy. So that's just a quick thing I wanted to tack on to the primary stuff. And I guess not to get too excited about Oklahoma legalizing medical marijuana, because that's still only medical, and they're still going to lock people up for using it without the right documentation for it.
That's true. Yep.
Speaking of doing stuff with and without documentation, I was privileged enough to be able to go to Canada last weekend.
Oh, Canada, eh?
And it just kind of like when you're hearing about this stuff, like people getting thrown into these detention centers on the news, like this is just a thing I can do. I can go to some other country, just have a good time there, and go back without too much nonsense, because I'm white and I have papers, basically.
Yeah.
It's also interesting how different it was going in versus going out. If you go in, they ask you if you have more than $10,000 worth of anything. Maybe.
No, I'm just kidding.
Bacon. They ask you if you have guns, which just kind of simple stuff the not even to be stereotypical, but the people on the way inside Canada did seem very polite. Going back, however, you meet with the CBP people, the Customs and Border Protection. Keep in mind, these are the people, the organization that does do the detaining. They have actual police at this post. They'll interrogate you a little bit. And both of us who were going were white, and we had our passports. They wanted to know specifically everything that we bought while we were in there. And you were seeing on the side, cars were getting searched. It was really uncomfortable. I can't imagine how bad that would be for people who are underdocumented or people of color, or even if I was more visibly queer then. However, the Pride Fest at Toronto, I was very impressed with. It did have a lot of spaces for radical voices. It had very trans-inclusive spaces. It had very queer people of color spaces encouraged in they have different stages for those kind of performances. They had a blackout performance. They had, a celebration of South Asian queerness on another stage. And overall, it was just a huge festival. Had a huge, big, long parade that I also really liked. Just a lot of things that really stuck out to me. And I think part of that intentionality there is due to the fact that Toronto is is probably the most diverse city in the world. It might just beat New York even.
Yep.
And, Canada generally does have a more, progressive culture a bit than the U.S., even though they did unfortunately recently have, Ford elected as premier of Ontario, which is the province that does hold Toronto. And he's the brother of their former crack-smoking mayor, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Who threatens to overturn Ontario's queer-positive sex ed. So there was I didn't get to talk with. I guess I wanted to talk with Canadians about more issues, kind of like break down some of the barriers, literally and figuratively, between us. Like just kind of start some important conversations. Most of it was about queer rights. Apparently, some of them still thought that we had housing and employment protections.
No,
if only.
That'd be nice. Yeah,
yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
I felt like I got some nonsense from the person I got, or the Airbnb from. Like, he called me the right name and stuff, but clearly he was ignorant and rude about some things, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hard. You never really know, even, like, you know, Canada, like, a lot of people, especially, like, white cis people, have a very kind of dismissive attitude towards people who are trans or non-binary, you know? So I wanted to kind of cap off the show talking a little bit about the confluence of everything that's been going on lately in the world, in our country, locally, and our own mental health, really. So, you know, the last couple weeks have been very rough, and, you know, I made that kind of Handmaid's Tale allusion earlier, but it does really feel like, I mean, everything seems to be going to poop, and it's accelerating, and it's been a rough couple of weeks for people who, you know, follow these issues, are empathic towards these issues, people in the community who are affected by these issues, you know. Right here in Kalamazoo, you know, we have a woman who's hiding out from ICE at the local church, the UCC, Sahida Nadine. We've got a young man who Ed Genesis came on the show and talked about a couple weeks ago, who is facing disproportionate punishment for something that really, like, a white student would probably just get a slap on the wrist for. This young man is looking at years in jail if they pursue it to the full extent of the law. The community, it's hurting, and even you know, the Vine neighborhood, that's where I currently live here in Kalamazoo. We've taken a few punches recently. I want to give a shout out. I didn't know him super well myself, but a dear, valued member of our community, Jake Korstange, passed away very recently. And the main reason I'm bringing all of these kind of topics up is this can be hard on everyone. It is hard on everyone to deal with all of these horrors just kind of coalescing and happening at once. And, you know, I myself, you know, I've been dealing with some very substantial, you know, melancholy, depression. You know, I'm sure, like, you know, us co-hosts on the show probably do that too. And I wanted to be, like, really open and transparent about that, because I know I'm probably not the only one out there who's been feeling that way. And I'll just throw out a trigger warning real quick. You know, if you're out there and, you know, I myself, there's been a little bit of, like, suicide ideation, and it's not even particularly because, you know, I personally do go through depressive cycles, but it's more just like everything is just so awful that you just, like, you just want, is there an exit? Is there? And for those of you out there who might be skirting on that little edge there, there's two things that I really want to tell everyone. One, you know, we call it community organizing for a reason. And the reason for that is you gotta depend on your community. Try not to isolate yourselves. Try not to just kind of power through everything that's going on right now. Everything that's going on right now is awful, and it is perfectly normal to feel awful. But being around other people who can lift you up, people that can help us get through these dark times, that is vitally important. And the other thing I would say, and this is just like a kernel you can hold on to when you are in those really dark moments, and it's something that actually helped me when I was really thinking about it. If fascism is gonna kill you, don't make it easy for them. Make them come to you and do the job them damn selves. Because you know what? We weren't the only people to live through some really oppressive times. People have had to find the strength to keep pushing on and fighting back. And that's what we all got to do. So with that in mind, I want to thank y'all for listening to the show today. Again, we upload these programs onto YouTube after the fact and listen anytime you want. We are on every Wednesday from 5 to 7. So again, thank y'all for tuning in and keep on fighting for that revolution solution.